1. The intimacy paradox. We all say we want to be deeply loved, fully known, intimately seen. But something strange happens the closer we get to another person. That closeness, that very intimacy we long for, begins to feel terrifying. It's as if the moment someone gets too close to the raw, unfiltered version of who we are, a part of us wants to run. This is the intimacy paradox. The more we crave closeness, the more our fear of rejection, exposure, and abandonment begins to sabotage it. In psychological terms, this paradox is rooted in attachment theory. When we were young, the way our caregivers responded to our emotional needs wired our brains for love. If they were safe, responsive, and consistent, we learned that closeness is safe. But if they were absent, chaotic, or emotionally unpredictable, our nervous system registered closeness as danger. So as adults, when love begins to feel real, our mind doesn't say, "This is beautiful." It says, "This is dangerous." That's why so many people start to feel suffocated or anxious when a relationship gets serious. Not because the person is wrong for them, but because their nervous system is screaming, "Don't get hurt again." You may have noticed this in yourself or someone you love. You finally feel connected, truly seen, and suddenly the other person pulls away. Or maybe it's you who starts looking for flaws, excuses, reasons to sabotage it. Deep down, intimacy threatens our most fragile illusion, that we are unbroken, that we are lovable without conditions. But closeness requires revealing the parts of ourselves we've spent years hiding. Even from ourselves, that's terrifying. Because what if the person sees those parts and leaves? The great existential psychologists believe that love is the ultimate human risk. It requires surrendering control, opening wounds that may never heal, and trusting someone with your most unguarded truth. But here's the catch. Without that risk, you never truly connect. You stay trapped in surface-level relationships where everything looks fine but nothing feels real. So how do we deal with the intimacy paradox? The answer isn't to avoid closeness. It's to become conscious of the fear that arises when intimacy deepens. Instead of reacting from it, pulling away, shutting down, picking fights, you pause. You acknowledge that fear as a residue from the past, not a sign that something is wrong in the present. The paradox loses its grip the moment you shine awareness on it. Vulnerability, when embraced consciously, transforms fear into connection. In the end, love doesn't hurt. It's the fear of love, the story of what might go wrong, that hurts. The intimacy paradox isn't asking you to choose between closeness and safety. It's asking whether you're willing to be brave enough to heal while you love. Because maybe, just maybe, real healing only begins when you stop hiding. 2. The ironic process paradox. Try this right now. Don't think of a pink elephant, just don't. Whatever you do, don't imagine it. Don't picture its giant ears, its weird cartoon eyes, its fat pink trunk. Try harder. Chances are it's now all you can think about. Welcome to the ironic process paradox. Coined by psychologist Daniel Wegner, the ironic process theory describes a strange function of the human brain. The more you try not to think of something, the more likely it is to dominate your awareness. On the surface, this sounds like a simple mental glitch. But beneath it lies one of the most profound challenges of being human. The fact that control itself can become the trap. Think of a person with insomnia. The harder they try to sleep, the more awake they feel. Or someone trying to forget an ex. The more they suppress those thoughts, the louder and more frequent they become. This happens because thought suppression is a two-part process. The conscious mind tries to push the thought away while the subconscious keeps checking to make sure you're not thinking about it. Ironically, that checking process feeds the very thought you're trying to avoid. This paradox is one of the reasons anxiety spirals out of control. You feel anxious, so you try not to think anxious thoughts, but trying not to think anxious thoughts only brings more of them. Your very resistance becomes fuel. It's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. The harder you push, the more violently it pops up. Wegner's theory shook the foundation of cognitive psychology because it challenged a long-standing belief that we can simply control our thoughts through willpower. But the brain doesn't work like a computer, it's more like a wild animal, sensitive, reactive, and unpredictable under pressure. The key, then, isn't control, it's acceptance. Mindfulness practices and acceptance-based therapies have embraced this paradox. Instead of fighting unwanted thoughts, you learn to observe them without judgment. You allow the pink elephant to exist, and in doing so, it often loses its grip. This is the deeper wisdom. What you resist persists, but what you accept begins to dissolve. The ironic process paradox reveals that the path to peace is rarely about force. It's about presence. It's not about fixing the mind. It's about listening to it, even when it says something uncomfortable. Because sometimes the only way to move forward is to stop running. 3. The confidence paradox. Imagine two people walk into a room. One speaks loudly, decisively, confidently, claiming to know exactly what's going on. The other hesitates, questions their own thinking, and keeps saying, "I'm not sure." Who would you believe? Most people choose the first. But here's the paradox. The one who's unsure may be far more competent. This is the confidence paradox, best known through the lens of the Dunning-Kruger effect. Social psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger found that the less a person knows, the more likely they are to overestimate their abilities. In contrast, people with true expertise often underestimate themselves. The more you understand a subject, the more you see its complexity, and the more aware you become of what you don't know. This paradox plays out in every area of life. In school, students with the loudest opinions often grasp the least. In workplaces, those who boast about being natural leaders are frequently poor collaborators. On social media, the most confident voices often have the weakest evidence. And in relationships, people who declare "I know myself" are often masking deep self-avoidance. Why does this happen? Because ignorance creates illusion. When you know very little, you don't yet realize the scope of what's missing. The unknown unknowns feel invisible. But as your knowledge deepens, so does your humility. You no longer see yourself as right or wrong. You see how uncertain and layered reality actually is. This paradox isn't just about intelligence, it's about wisdom. Confidence, when rooted in ignorance, is dangerous. It leads to overreach, blind spots, and even harm. But confidence born from humility, one that says, "I don't have all the answers, but I'm willing to learn," is the kind that transforms people and systems. In a world obsessed with certainty, the confidence paradox is a quiet rebellion. It asks us to trust the ones who admit they don't know. It asks us to rethink how we define leadership, expertise, and strength. And perhaps most importantly, it reminds us that the loudest voice isn't always the wisest one. In the end, true confidence doesn't scream. It listens. It doesn't pretend to know everything. It asks better questions. And sometimes the most powerful words a person can say are, "I don't know, but I'm curious." 4th, paradoxical intention. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, once said something radical. "If you want to overcome your anxiety, try to make yourself more anxious." On the surface, that sounds absurd, but it's the heart of a psychological method he called paradoxical intention. And it's one of the strangest but most effective treatments for fear. The idea is simple but powerful. When you deliberately exaggerate the very thing you fear, you interrupt the pattern that gives it power. For example, imagine someone with a fear of public speaking. Instead of trying to calm down, they go up and say, "I'm probably going to mess this up, and that's okay." They lean into their anxiety instead of resisting it. And somehow, in that moment of surrender, the anxiety loses its edge. Frankl discovered this paradox while treating patients with extreme phobias and compulsions. He found that people who feared sweating could reduce it by saying, "Watch me sweat even more today." People with insomnia who feared sleeplessness could say, "Tonight I'll try to stay awake as long as possible." This reversal short-circuited the anxiety loop. Here's why it works. Anxiety feeds on resistance. When you fear something, your body enters a hypervigilant state. You monitor, anticipate, and react. But when you deliberately invite the fear, it can no longer surprise you. It becomes powerless. The tension breaks. Your nervous system, expecting panic, is met with curiosity or even humor. This paradox has been echoed in other traditions too. In Buddhism, they say, "What you resist persists. What you accept transforms." In modern exposure therapy, clients are taught to face their fears gradually, not to erase them, but to prove that fear doesn't define them. But paradoxical intention goes even deeper. It's not just about behavior, it's about identity. It challenges the belief that you must be fearless to be free. Instead, it says, you can be afraid and still act. You can embrace the discomfort and walk through it, not around it. In a world that tells us to control everything, our emotions, our image, our outcomes, paradoxical intention whispers the opposite. Give up control and you'll find strength. This doesn't mean giving in to fear. It means seeing fear as something you can play with, dance with, even laugh at. Sometimes healing doesn't come from fixing the fear. It comes from befriending it. And that's the paradox. Freedom often begins with surrender. The change paradox. In the quiet spaces of therapy rooms and spiritual retreats, people come searching for one thing: transformation. They want to be free from anxiety, addiction, low self-worth. They want to stop overthinking, stop running from themselves, stop feeling like they're not enough. But here's the paradox that Carl Rogers, one of the most respected humanistic psychologists, revealed. Real change doesn't begin when you try to be someone else. It begins when you finally accept yourself as you are. The curious paradox, Rogers wrote, is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change. At first glance, this feels contradictory. If you accept yourself, why would you want to change? And if you want to change, doesn't that mean you don't accept yourself? But Rogers wasn't talking about settling or giving up. He was pointing to a deeper truth about the human mind. The more we fight who we are, the more stuck we become. If you tell yourself, I must be confident, I must be happy, I must be productive, you create a war within. You deny what's real, but when you pause and say, I feel insecure right now, or I'm sad today and that's okay, something shifts. You soften, you breathe, you stop resisting your reality. And in that moment, you create the space for something new to grow. Change doesn't happen through shame. It doesn't respond to self-punishment or force. True transformation arises when you meet yourself with honesty and compassion. That's why therapy isn't about fixing people. It's about creating a space where they can feel seen without being judged. And in that safe space, people begin to unfold. Just like a flower that blossoms not because you yank on it, but because the soil is warm, the light is kind, and the environment says, it's okay to bloom. Many people are trapped in cycles of self-improvement that only deepen their suffering. They read books, attend seminars, repeat affirmations, but nothing changes. Why? Because underneath all those efforts is the belief, I'm not good enough as I am. That belief becomes the prison. But when you stop trying to become someone and start being with who you are, broken, confused, raw, you open the door to real growth. The paradox of change isn't about giving up on your goals. It's about changing the energy behind them. When you accept yourself, you don't lose motivation. You gain clarity. You act from love, not fear. You move forward not to escape who you are, but to become more of who you already are. Healing isn't about becoming a better version of yourself. It's about remembering that even the broken parts deserve kindness. And when you give yourself that kindness, you no longer need to change to feel worthy. You change because you're already worthy. The human mind is far more twisted than we think, and these were just the beginning. The remaining 5 paradoxes, the ones that bend reality even deeper, will be revealed in the next part. So stay tuned, hit that subscribe button, and more importantly, drop your thoughts in the comments. Which paradox hit you the hardest and why?